wish that I had known it would be okay. I was comparing so much. I didn't realise that all these things were going to come, but in time.
So welcome to the Beautiful Reality of Autism podcast, where we try to give parents hope, inspiration, advice, practical tips and suggestions for creating that nurturing and productive relationship with their autistic children that can help them to unlock their full potential. Today, we're talking to Lisa Lloyd, a woman who started out simply trying to survive family life and somehow became one of the loudest and most important voices in the British autism conversation. Online, millions of people know her as ASD with G and T, a funny, brutally honest person whose posts about parenting autistic children, exhaustion, school battles, sensory overload, and the reality of trying to hold a family together inside a system that many parents feel is failing them. But behind the humour is something deeper. Lisa was raising two autistic children before eventually realising that she herself was autistic too. And that late diagnosis forced her to completely re-understand not just her children, but her entire life. Hello, Lisa, and welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thank you so much for having me on and for that lovely introduction.
Let's start with your book. I didn't mention that you have a book published by Penguin called The SENbetweeners.
Raising the SENbetweeners.
Raising the SENbetweeners. And I think that's a really good place to start for you to explain to us who are the SENbetweeners? What does that mean?
Yeah, so it's actually a word that I came up with, and it seems to have sort of taken off a little bit, which is amazing, by some autistic young adults as well, and they call themselves the SENbetweeners. Basically, it's basically about my children, in particular my eldest, my son Finley. And he, I felt, was somewhere in between worlds. So he was in mainstream at the time that I wrote the book, but wasn't coping, couldn't cope in mainstream. But I was told constantly that he wasn't complex enough or severe enough for a SEND school. So I sort of found him in between worlds where he didn't fit into either and therefore fell between the gaps, especially within the school system. And it's where you find yourself in a very, very lonely place where you don't fit with the neurotypicals, but you also don't fit with a lot of SEND families. And I wrote the book because I wanted there to be something out there that people could relate to, such as myself. I'd read so many amazing books on autism, but they were never quite right for my child because he was verbal, he's academic, and it wasn't your sort of stereotypical autism that we've sort of all grown up to know.
Yeah. Is he diagnosed, Lisa?
He is, yes. Both my children are diagnosed. And again, it was a real battle to get his diagnosis. And I saw a real difference between him and his sister Poppy. Poppy got diagnosed at the age of 3. She was speech delayed and she was sort of showing all your sort of stereotypical autism traits, flapping, tiptoe walking and things like that. And she was, behind at school. Whereas Finn was hitting all his milestones, but socially he was, really struggling with his anxiety, his mental health at such a young age. So he actually wasn't diagnosed until the age of 6, and that was after 4 years of us going back and forth to the paediatrician. And it felt like there was such a contrast between the two. One I was really, really fighting for support with, and one we were sort of given all the support with. It was very, very strange. And I would say, in a way, he was suffering more than Poppy was, but he was actually given less support. Which is the crazy thing. And a lot of people often say to me, oh, is she more complex and everything? And I say, well, it depends in what way you're talking about, because, she doesn't carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. She doesn't have this need to fit in and feeling like she's different and things, whereas Finn did have that. So it was actually more of a struggle. He struggled with his autism more than her, I would say.
And I guess being in a mainstream school, it sort of exacerbates that sort of feeling of having a need to fit in, because that's the message that you're getting the whole time. You are different. And also you learn to sort of cope in the best way that you can, which isn't really coping from your point of view, but it's the best that you can do. And because you go through that extra effort, it can be seen that you don't have a problem because you're managing. And what's not seen is what it's taking you to manage and how much it's costing you to hold that facade together for so long.
Yeah, it's exactly that, because the problem that we had with him was masking. And, I always say to people that, people sometimes think masking is a sort of coping mechanism. And I say to them, it's actually suffering in silence. It's not a good thing. On the outside, to the teachers who would be told, he seems fine to us. He's very quiet, well behaved, settling down. And but behind closed doors, when he would get home, we would see what that had caused. We would get those horrific meltdowns and outbursts when he got back home, and him desperately not wanting to go back in again. And, it's the hardest thing from a parent's perspective as well, when you're trying to say to the teachers, something is going on here, but everybody around you is saying, no, it's fine. It starts making you feel like you're going a bit crazy as well, and feeling like it's your parenting.
Yeah, they do. Because, the teachers, what you're saying to them is so at odds with their experience, and they don't realize why. They don't see him when he comes home. They only see him when he's forcing himself to hold it together. And I often think that this word masking, it doesn't really do full justice to the experience. It almost suggests that there's some sort of active deception going on. And it's something that's just really easy to do and convenient. But actually, if I think back to my experience of what would have been called masking, when I was a child, I wasn't aware of doing anything at all. I was simply adapting to what I thought I needed to do in order to survive, what I thought was expected of every person. I wasn't even aware how much more difficult it was for me than it was for everybody else until much later. I thought, well, everyone else is doing this, so I just have to manage it. So it can so easily be overlooked what the child is actually going through.
Oh, so easily. And like you said, this is the same for me growing up. And, I still find it now. And, people often think I'm really sociable and everything like that. And, after this, I will be drained. After going and doing book signings and things like that, I am so exhausted afterwards, because it is sort of holding it all together. And it's, you've sort of got this, I don't know how to even explain it, but it's like you're having to sort of play a different part, or, try and blend in where you are. And it's like, it's exhausting. It really is. And I can see that toll that it's taken on Finn before. And then I saw him in a different environment, which showed when you're in the right setting and people understand you, it's completely different. So he now goes to a SEND school, which is actually essentially like an in-betweeners school. It's for autistic children who are academically okay, or sort of, 2 years ahead or 2 years behind where they should be at. But it's got smaller class sizes, it's got sensory rooms, quiet spaces. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. It's what every child should have, I think, even if they're neurodivergent or not, to be honest. But when he was in the first year there, we were getting so many phone calls and, saying that he's having meltdowns, he's been throwing things, this and that. And we were like, this isn't Finn. This is not him. Like, he's always been so well behaved and quiet but he was coming home happy. And, and I said to the teachers, I think it's because he's comfortable there. And I was like, you're actually honoured that he's behaving this way. Even though they probably didn't see it like that. But I was like, he's actually being himself and he's showing them the things that he's struggling with and he's comfortable enough to let it out. And then when he's getting home, he's happy because he's showing his feeling. And, it was the transition time with year 7. So it's all sort of settled down again now, thankfully.
And it sounds like that's a school that would actually appreciate that comment.
It is a state school and there's unfortunately very few of them. And this is something the government they've even been trying to shut down this school and turn it into a school for high care needs instead. And, there's been quite big fights going on about that because they've designed the whole school around lower care needs. And, there is, it's needed for both. We need schools for high care needs, but we also need them for low care needs as well. And, that is the heartbreaking thing, is that so many of our children are now being pushed into mainstream and being forced to keep there when there are alternatives that would be better suited.
Yeah. And it's very largely a financial question as well. My son's just been through, he's at a later stage now. He's just been through trying to get a place in a sixth form. And the school where he's at has an amazing sixth form. And he really wanted to get into that sixth form. 90% of children who apply from that school to that sixth form who really need it and who also really need the continuity of being in the same, it's not the same physical system, but it's
not changing.
I turned down, and they're given places in mainstream that they're not equipped for, and the parents have to fight so hard. And in case, most of the time the parents win, those parents who manage to sort of fight all the way through. But in some cases, they've lost a year of school by the time the decision goes through. And it just seems such a shame to sort of to deny the children the support that they need at every stage along the way.
It's heartbreaking, and this is the worrying thing with everything going on with the white paper and everything at the moment, and replacing EHCPs and things. And it's like, this is the thing that helps a lot of children to be at school. Without the EHCPs and stuff like that, some of them will absolutely not make it through it. And, mainstream, I think at secondary school, is just incredibly hard, like, to navigate. And, it's not just the schoolwork, it's everything surrounding it. For a neurodivergent person, it's hell on earth, to be honest. You've got different classes that you have to get to with different teachers, sometimes with different pupils. You've got the bullying that goes on there, the second that children know that you're a little bit different. And, it's very out of date, I think the school system is. And I think it's never really changed over the years. And the sad thing is, if they adapted it more and made them all more neurodivergent friendly, all the kids would benefit, all of them.
Yeah.
Even the neurotypical ones. Whereas at the moment, it's designed around neurotypicals, and you've got so many pupils missing out because of that.
Yeah. I often think that, best practice care for autistic children is also best practice care for every child. It's just that autistic children need it much more.
Yeah.
So,
and let's face it, I mean, kids are kids. Like, they're not designed to sit at a desk all day. There's other countries that do it far better, I think, and they make sure they've got so many movement breaks, and they start them at a later age at school and things like that. And I think, let kids be kids a lot of the time.
and for you as a mother, how was it especially in those early years with Finn and him having all of those troubles in mainstream school and not being able to find him a place in the sort of setting that he needed? What sort of ways did you find to support him during that time? How did you ensure that, you and your relationship with him was supportive for him? And, because sometimes many parents struggle with that piece. How do I best support my child?
Yeah, well, that is one of the things that's the hardest, is because you feel that you're letting them down, and you're supposed to be their safe person. You're supposed to protect them from everything. And, you're sort of felt like you're throwing them into the fire. And, and there would be times that I would take him in, and the teachers would literally be pulling him off of me with him screaming and begging me to not leave him there. And that does things to you as a parent. I would spend days sobbing and feeling like the worst parent in the world. And that is when I thought something has to change, because I cannot keep going through these years of seeing him like this. And I could see him slipping away, his personality. It's like, he went in advanced starting school. He was like 2 years ahead academically. And by the time we were like 2-3 years in, he was 2 years behind, and that was just getting worse and worse. And so that is when we started looking into fighting for an EHCP and everything like that. And I have to say, we were incredibly lucky with the school that we had, because even though it was a mainstream, they knew what he needed. They knew he needed an EHCP, and they luckily had a SEN provision there, which they allowed him to access 90% of the time, because he couldn't cope in the mainstream classroom. And with them helping me, we managed to finally get that assessment done. But I have to say, if I didn't have that support from the school, I think I would have pulled him out and would have been home educating. And I was very, very close to it. And that's the only option that a lot of parents have. They have to give up their careers, and they have sort of been forced to home educate, and you should never be forced. That should be a choice. But I think you get to that stage with watching your child's mental health, and you think, there's nothing else I can do here except pull them out of this environment.
And so what changed at home once he was in his new environment?
Everything. So he started getting his personality back and laughing. And I remember turning around to my husband, Terry, and I said, "Oh my God, our son is really funny." It was like, we didn't know. We had lost this child, and he suddenly had this confidence as well. He was gaining his confidence. He was getting his personality back. And you don't realise how damaging it is until they're in the correct environment, I think. And that's when you see what they can become, what they can achieve when they're in that right setting. And that is the most heartbreaking thing for me, is that there are so many children that will never be in that right setting. And oh my God, all the things that they could achieve if they were. And that's not through their fault. That is the system, the very, very broken system that we're in. And that is what's heartbreaking, because, you know, he's like a completely different child, completely different. I mean, sometimes a little bit too much confidence now, but yeah, he's happy. And that's all we would ever want, isn't it? It's our kids to be happy.
That's such a powerful story, Lisa, and such an important one, because I think a lot of the time, people in their offices who are making those decisions arbitrarily don't realize the profound impact it's having on the lives of each child. And it really makes the difference between whether that child can live in, a fulfilled life, or whether they're going to sort of regress more and more until they're not reachable anymore.
That's it. And it's like you said, I think the problem is the people making these decisions, they our children are just another number. They're just a statistic to them. But these are real lives, real children who can achieve real things. And that is the most frustrating side of it, is if they understood the damage that was being done and the long-term effect. It's unfortunately, it's all about saving money and it comes down to things like that. But long term, they probably would save money. Parents wouldn't have to give up their jobs, so they wouldn't go on to benefits. Our children would come out with qualifications, possibly, be able to get a job, possibly, all of these things. And it's like, long term, there would be a great saving to it. But, they're only looking at making the small savings now, but at the detriment of so many children.
It doesn't seem to make any sense at all, does it? And, along this journey, you found out yourself at some point. It's a thing that happens that's quite common. It happened to me as well. My son was about 8. I found out that I was autistic. You found out that you were autistic as well. So when did that happen, and how did that become apparent to you?
Well, I mean, like you said, I think this happens with so many parents, doesn't it? Because 9 times out of 10, it comes from somewhere. and so I was seeing a lot of myself, especially in Finn, and I could understand a lot of his struggles and things like that, things that he didn't want to do, things that he couldn't cope with, things that he was having a meltdown about. And I would quite often relate and completely understand it. And Terry, my hubby, would be like completely not understanding what's going on, seeing things as an overreaction. So I did have in my head that there was definitely some traits there. And then me being online a lot, obviously I'm followed by a lot of autistic people, and a lot of them kept saying to me, I really think you need to go and get tested. I don't know what I was doing, but something was like giving something off to them. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to go and see what's said, because I've spent a lot of my life being depressed. I've been on antidepressants for a very, very long time. From school, I hated school. I've always struggled in workplaces. I've struggled from one thing to the next. And I really, really struggled with parenting. And this is what I write about in my new book coming out, Unmasking Mum, because there's a huge something that isn't spoken about enough is when you're a neurodivergent parent, going from that transition from not being a parent to becoming a parent is humongous. And suddenly all your coping mechanisms and things like that, you can't do anymore. And I think that's why a lot of us realise after having children that we're neurodivergent, because, if I was feeling overwhelmed, people down, I'd go and hide away for a week. Wouldn't see anybody if I didn't have to. Can't do that because I come home and my kids are here. And, I love them to pieces, but they are my biggest trigger as well. They're touching me all the time, poking me, prodding me. They're very loud, even though they hate noise. And all of these things that I think a lot of us don't realise, and we would usually escape it somehow, but you cannot escape your children. And I think that's why a lot of us realise that we are. And I went to the assessment and I sobbed the whole way through it. I don't know if you got really emotional as well. But it was, it was sort of realising what a struggle life has been, from school and everything like that. And, sort of hiding this my whole life. And it really does sort of help in a lot of ways. I didn't think it would make much difference to me. I was 41, getting diagnosed at 41, but it has taught me to be kinder to myself. It's taught me to say no to things, that I am allowed to say no to things that make me uncomfortable. It's taught me to understand that I need to give myself as much grace as I give the kids. I need to, if I'm feeling meltdown coming, that's okay. And I need to do something about that. And it's funny how we put all these things in place for our children a lot, but we forget about ourselves. And we need that support. We need to put these things for ourselves as well.
I think that's a tendency that many mothers have anyway. But if you're an autistic mother, it's going to be much bigger. But I totally recognise a lot of what you're saying, and it's almost like for me also. I went through this same thing where it was people who were autistic people. I was saying to them, "Do you know what? I think I might be autistic," and I was thinking I was like opening some secret door or something. And their answer was always like, "Well, yeah, of course you are. It's obvious. It's no big deal." But for a while, it hit me much slower. For a while, after learning that I was autistic, I was like, I thought, if anyone asked me, has it made any difference to your life? I always said no, because it's only a name, it's only a word, and I sort of realised it before. But actually, it was only like a couple, 2 or 3 years later that I went through the process that you were talking about, where it's like you realize what you've been through in the past, and you realize like how unkind you were to yourself in the past, and how you always assumed there was something wrong with you and that you were the problem. And it's like adjusting to a different way of thinking is quite difficult. It doesn't come easily or quickly. This way of, oh, wait a second, there's actually not anything wrong with me. I just work differently.
Yeah. But that's exactly what we have being parents, I think, as well. There's a lot of blame on ourselves and feeling like we've got it wrong somehow. And I think, that's one of the sort of autistic traits, is having this imposter syndrome and things like that as well. And, rejection sensitivity and things. And I think, that made my journey parenting even harder as well, because I'm already hard on myself. Then when you've suddenly got children that are diagnosed as well, you look at, what have I done wrong? What, could I have done this better? Could I have done that better? And, it's hard because we've sort of got that ingrained in us. And I think probably because we have spent a lifetime of being told, we've got it wrong, or we've done something wrong, or we've taken it the wrong way, or we've been oversensitive, and all of these things that are actually, that negativity goes in it, and that sticks. And it's really hard to shake that off. And especially when you've gone your whole life not realising that you're neurodivergent, it's hard to then change your mindset and think, actually, I've done really well, considering I've spent my lifetime not knowing I'm neurodivergent and, trying to navigate this neurotypical world. I've actually done a bloody good job.
Yeah. And we have to give those messages to ourselves, because there's still people around us, sometimes very close people, who still don't give us that leeway, who still think those things, you're being oversensitive, or why are you handling this in this way, or whatever, or why is this a problem for you? This shouldn't be a problem, and that sort of thing. So it's really important that we're kind to ourselves.
Yeah. And, and it's all those things that we hear all the time. And then I heard it with the kids, and I've heard it myself, you don't look autistic. They don't look autistic, all of those things. And, those sort of lead you to feel like you are going a bit crazy, because it's like, well, if it's not that, what is it? And, now that people are sort of understanding more, I hope that we're going in the right direction. Sometimes I wonder if we are or not at the moment, but there's still, unfortunately, a lot of ignorance out there, and a lot of people still do need educating on what a spectrum is and how different it looks to everybody. Because I think this is the thing with humans in general. They want to lump you into, will put you in boxes. And it's like, as we know, every neurodivergent person is so individually different. You can't put them in boxes.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I say, like, forget the spectrum of autism. We have a spectrum of humanity. Every individual is an individual. And I think, it's almost like when we get that degree of compassion for ourselves and understanding for ourselves, that's when we can actually make a difference to others. And that's when we can actually offer other people the compassion and the perspective that they need from us. And it's not restricted to autism or any particular neurological type. It's like, it doesn't matter if it's got a name. It doesn't matter if it fits into a category or not. If a person works in a certain way, they work in that sort of way. They experience life through that sort of lens. And that's not any less deserving, however inconvenient it might be, because there are some categories of people which are really not as fit into society very, very, with a lot of difficulty, or that push a lot of people's buttons and trigger a lot of people. But still to have compassion for those people, because you don't choose your neurology.
No, exactly. And and I do think we are getting better with that understanding. I think, especially, the medical profession, but I think still people need to keep up with that. And I think some of it, I don't know if you found this, but some of the people that, in the family and stuff, that will say, like, oh, there's nothing wrong with you, you're like me. And it's like,
Yeah.
I am like you. And, they don't realise it themselves, that they're neurodivergent. And we had that with my dad. And we now, almost 100%, my dad was autistic as well. It makes perfect sense now, because, he was very antisocial. People would think he was quite rude, but actually behind closed doors, he was so different. And because he was in his safe place, and he was so funny and so loving, but nobody saw that side of him, unfortunately. And I think, how many people have gone through their lives so misunderstood by others, simply because it's their anxiety at play and things like that. They come across as rude, but actually it's sort of a protection thing that they have. And it's, I think it's only better for us to understand more and learn more and understand how different we all are, but, and really recognising and getting that diagnosis that, so many people say it's a label. And I'm like, but that, you label everybody before any diagnosis anyway. Everybody labels everybody. You get labelled with shy, you get labelled with naughty, you get labelled as rude, and all these labels are actually not correct. Whereas it's a diagnosis, it's not a label. And but people have a very strange relationship with that, and I don't know why that is. You wouldn't walk out the doctors with a diabetes diagnosis and people turn around and say, oh, everybody's getting labelled with that these days. You just wouldn't have
maybe
it.
it's partly about the stigma that they fear that they will get from others. Maybe it's they fear their own reaction a lot of the time.
It's funny enough, I always say to people, you're never too old to get that diagnosis. Our old neighbour, he was in his 80s and he got diagnosed. And he said to me he'd been chucked out of school. He'd had lots of problematic relationships and things like that throughout his life. And he got that diagnosis at 80, and it really helped him. Even at that stage in life, to think, actually, that was never me, being the bad kid. I was misunderstood. And I think that helps so much more than anybody would ever understand, unless you've lived through that feeling that you're in the wrong your whole life.
And I can actually see it being really powerful at that late stage in life, because it's almost like closure. It's almost
Yeah,
like sort of bringing everything together. Oh, right. Okay.
yeah.
And then probably I wish I'd known 50 years ago or something.
Well, exactly. That's the thing. That's the sad thing, because how many have never got diagnosed that should have been? And, I can't imagine how hard it was years and years ago, when they used the cane on you and things
Yeah.
like that as well. It's like, it doesn't even bear thinking about.
But I mean, I guess even for me and you, people like me and you, if we'd known 40 years earlier, or if people around us had known 40 years earlier, our whole lives could have been totally different.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And I think, all the things that I missed out on. And I think maybe if there'd just been some adjustments done for me and things like that, then I would have been able to do the things that I wanted to do. I never went on residential trips and stuff like that because I could not stay away from home. I hated sleepovers or anything like that because that was my routine was gone. And, but if adjustments had been put in place, maybe I would have got on better. And the same in the workplaces. I mean, I skipped from one job to the next. And, when I actually got diagnosed, I said to the assessor lady, I said, it probably seems weird that I'm on social media and everything. I'm saying to you, I have social anxiety and things. And she said to me, no, it's the perfect job. She said, you're working from home in your safe place. You don't have to talk to anybody. You're talking at them, whereas you can't see or hear them back. And I was like, actually, yeah, it is the perfect job.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's counterintuitive, but it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about your social media activities much, and they are, they're the main thing that you do at the moment, aren't they? They're a huge part, and you've got an enormous number of followers. Do you want to just very briefly outline what your channels are, where people can find them, what sort of thing they can find there, and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I'm known as ASD with a G and T online. I wasn't actually expecting to get a very big following. It just turned out that me sort of moaning a lot, a lot of people could relate to it. And yeah, so I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And, I'm just incredibly lucky to have this platform because it's actually created such an incredible community online. And obviously, social media can be quite a horrible place sometimes, to be honest, with trolls and things, but it also can be an incredible place. And I've learned so much from so many amazing parents and autistic individuals. And, many of my best friends now I've met through social media, and most of them have children with high care needs. They have children that are non-verbal, they're teenagers that are still in nappies, they're going to need full-time care forever. But it doesn't matter. We still have the same passion. We still have the same concerns. We still face the same judgment. And it's actually so lovely to be surrounded by others that get it and that understand. And yeah, from this incredible platform, I've managed to, I thought I'd bring out a book about the SENbetweeners and just hope it would help somebody out there. And it became a Sunday Times bestseller, which is just mad.
And it's been published by Penguin. A lot of people have written books. Like my book is self-published. It's on Amazon. Most people, a lot of parents of autistic children have written a book somewhere along the line. You got yours published. How did that come about?
Well, so I was self-published as well. So I initially self-published and I thought, a few people may relate to this, they may buy it. So I thought I'm going to take the risk, I'll self-publish and get it out there. And I've always loved writing. And then within 24 hours, it went to number 3 out of all books on Amazon. And I suddenly started getting phone calls from different publishers, sort of fighting over it. And me and my hubby were like, what on earth is going on here? And so, yeah, we went with Penguin in the end, and it literally changed our lives, like overnight. So we were in a very, very small 2-bedroom house before, and the children were having to share a room. And that was an absolute nightmare. Waking each other up. They're also boy and girl, and getting into the teen years and everything. And now we're in a 3-bedroom house because of that. And they've got separate rooms. And, we're not in a mansion, but it's changed our lives. And, and just hearing from so many people that the book's helped, and many teachers as well. The amount of teachers, and even Finn's old head teacher called me up after I bought the book out and said, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that I turned around and said to you I couldn't see it, and, I didn't think there was any problems there. And I was like, you don't need to apologise because you didn't see anything, and that, that's part of masking. But it's incredible how many people it's helped, and I'm just so grateful for that.
That's incredible. So let's move on. There are 4 questions I ask to everybody who comes on. The first one, what does autism mean to you?
For me personally, from my experience being autistic, and from looking at my children, autism to us is feeling everything a bit more. It's, heightened senses. It's feeling empathy in incredible amount. It's overthinking. It's talents that, that from memory and things like that, the things that I see with my children is like they blow me away with the things that they can remember. But it's what I explain to my children. It's a different mindset. It's a different way of thinking. So you would get neurotypicals and you would get autistic people, and their minds just work very, very differently. And not one is wrong, not one is bad. They're just different mindsets. I tend to not use the autism superpower. I know some people do like that. I don't use it because my children take things very literally, for one thing. So they would be expecting to be able to jump off buildings and be invisible and things. And, I want them to understand that autism, as beautiful as it can be, it also comes with its struggles.
So the next question is, what is one thing about autism that you'd wished you'd known much earlier?
I wish that I had known it would be okay. I was so terrified in the beginning, and so sort of, I was comparing so much to everybody else, and I didn't realise that it was actually making us miserable. And I didn't realise that all these things were going to come, but in time, in their own time. And I think now that I just wish that I had not spent so much time being crippled with anxiety about the future and everything, and just listened to the kids more, listened to their needs more, followed their lead, and then instead of looking around all the time.
I think that's a really powerful answer as well. And we could do a whole episode just on that,
Yeah,
just on that idea of like, because even when you have that realization that you've had that everything's going to be okay, it still comes up in little ways all the time. Is this okay? Am I letting my child down by not correcting this? Am I letting my child down by not finding a way to help them to be different? Knowing that actually it is going to be okay in the end, and knowing that, we ourselves, me and you, went through a different development curve than anybody else. Some things, I'm sure it was the same with you, some things we picked up years later, sometimes decades later than other people. And it's fine.
Definitely. Definitely. And it's, even friendships, I've only really met my friends in my 40s, and they're things that I worry about with the kids all the time. Are they going to make friends? Are they interacting enough and everything? And I think, well, looking at myself, it's taken a lot longer, but yeah, you do get there in the end.
And the flip side is to acknowledge the things that come earlier or that might not otherwise come at all. It's not like a one-way street that it's all deficits and it's all delays. It's actually well balanced. There's a lot of good stuff that comes earlier as well.
Yeah, 100%.
What's the one piece of practical advice that you would give to any other parent of an autistic child?
Practical advice, I mean, like we just said, to not compare is a huge one, because it does drive you insane otherwise. And to sort of throw out the rule books. I found many baby books and things like that, they are based on neurotypical children. And, that's going to look very, very differently to us. I was told by everybody around me, you have to take the dummy away by 6 months. So, that's what the book said. That's what everybody around me was saying. So I took Finn's dummy away. And my God, I don't know why I did that now. Why I didn't just keep it that bit longer. It was his comfort. His cries would trigger me. And it's like how I needed that a little bit longer. So I needed to listen to my own needs as well, rather than, what is the thing that you're supposed to do. I needed to listen to myself and trust my instincts more. I know what's best for me. I know what's best for my child. So we need to be really confident with that. And even with professionals, they've only met our children for like 2 minutes, 30 minutes. We know what they're going to need better than anybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've all got examples of falling into that trap, haven't we? And finally, what is something that we're still getting wrong about autism as a society?
Well, I mean, quite a lot, to be honest. The fact that like we said earlier about calling it a label and, thinking autism has a look and things like that, I think there's a real struggle with people understanding masking. PDA is very misunderstood as well. So Poppy has PDA, which is pathological demand avoidance, which people do not actually like that name either, to be honest. So I think they are looking at changing that. And, that is very misunderstood. A lot of people think it's bad behaviour. And really, it's anxiety. It's, that's what it comes down to. And I think a lot of things around autism with meltdowns, PDA, stuff like that does come down to anxiety within us or within our children. And I think that's hugely misunderstood.
Yeah. And absolutely, I can totally understand why people don't like the name. If you put pathological in the name to something, you're just saying right from the start, there is something wrong with you before I even describe what this is.
Yeah, it's an awful word. I think people want to use persistent drive for autonomy now.
Okay.
I think that's the alternative.
Yeah.
Because pathological just sounds so bad.
Yeah, it's very 1950s, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
Lisa, it's been a great pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on.